Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. Daniel Estulin. Welcome to our internet-based, my YouTube channel show, World at Large. So a lot of people have been asking a lot of very legitimate questions. For example, what does terrorism and intelligence agencies, or whether we're talking about the CIA, the MI6, Mossad, the FBI, have in common? And then how is all of it related to the British and the Saudis, specifically the modus operandi of the Saudi financial system and its links with the British Empire? So you see, Saudi money does not flow out of the Saudi government treasury, but from various charities. That's a very important thing to remember. And many of these charitable and service organizations serving as fronts for international terrorist groups today grew out of the network of organizations established back in the 1980s to provide the funding, the materials, the recruits, and more to the mujahideen fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. And among such charities, I'll give you an example of a few. One called Al-Haramai and Al-Bukhmat Al-Khidman. These are the services organizations that are now widely seen as key precursor to what later developed into Al-Qaeda. And after Al-Haramain figured among a number of Saudi charities accused by Washington of financing terrorism after 9/11, the foundation was closed in Saudi Arabia back in 2005. And so Al-Haramain was said to have received between $45 and $50 million each year in donations and has spent some $300 million on humanitarian work, so to speak, overseas. And this brings us to the question of the relationship between the Saudis and Al-Qaeda. Again, beside the fact that we already know that 15 of the 19 terrorists on 9/11, remember that, operatives, they were Saudis. It's also to be noted that although the distance from Riyadh to southern Afghanistan is a fraction of the distance between Kabul and Washington, no airplane ever hit Saudi Arabian palaces, nor his fabled oil fields. And so all the major terrorist attacks that occurred inside Saudi Arabia were aimed against American targets there. In other words, if one ignores the mainstream media, there remains no doubt that Riyadh and Al-Qaeda worked in the past hand in glove. And that's easy to explain because both have the same objectives. And so one of the major figures dealing with the Taliban, for example, way back when, and protecting Al-Qaeda was the Georgetown University-educated Prince Turki bin Al-Faisal, who was also the ambassador to the United States of America. And so Prince Turki was given charge in 1993 of dealing with the feuding factions of Afghan Mujahideen. And so the Taliban began to emerge a year later. It's no coincidence. And Prince Turki was also working closely with the Pakistani EC intelligence and met Mullah Omar inside Afghanistan. Turki bin Al-Faisal was the Saudi intelligence chief between 1979 and 2002. We're talking over almost a quarter century. And these are the crucial years during which the Taliban was bred. The Afghan Taliban brought Al-Qaeda into Afghanistan. 9/11 events occurred in the United States. And all during the Turki Al-Faisal's watch. And then in 2002, the Saudi king appointed Prince Turki as the ambassador to Britain. And the appointment created some kind of an uproar in London, particularly amongst the intelligence community. But Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, personally intervened to accept his credentials. Of course, this travesty of justice could only become possible if Blair approval was executed at the highest echelons of power. In other words, supranational financial circles that control world's military-industrial juggernaut from behind the scenes. Okay, so this on the one hand. On the other hand, we have the British Empire. Now, contrary to popular opinion and belief, the British Empire does still exist. And in many respects, it's more global, more powerful, more vicious during its heyday in the 18th and the 19th centuries. Moreover, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which was effectively created by the British Empire between 1901 and 1932, is a critical extension of that empire. For example, Abdulaziz ibn Saud, who became Saudi monarch back in 1932, was on the British payroll for more than a decade. That should tell you who runs the things in the Middle East. And so, for the last, I'd say, 4 decades, the members of the British royal family, who has been, again, Empress Queen Elizabeth II's chief executive officer, working directly with the Saudi royal household and with the key Saudi personalities implicated in creating Al-Qaeda and also in supporting 9/11, has been Prince, today King Charles. Understand what I'm trying to tell you. And among Charles's closest collaborators, both past and present, are former head of Saudi intelligence, Prince Bandar bin Sultan bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, who died in 2016. And so Prince Turki bin Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, former Saudi ambassador to the United Kingdom and the United States, and also Prince Mohammed bin Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, head of the Dar Al Mal Al Islami Trust, DMI for short. That's a banking group. And this banking group is important because they're directly linked to Al Qaeda financing. And these are Charles's buddies. And of course, Prince, today King Charles, has been protected by this carefully constructed public image as this plant-loving environmentalist who talks to plants, who paints, who peers into the distance thinking of a beautiful new world, okay, post-humanity, obviously. But there is a real thug behind that veneer. Prince, today King Charles, has played a leading role in arming Saudi Arabia. He was pivotal, for example, during the 1990s in concluding contracts for Al Yamama, the second part of the phase BAE, British Arms for Saudi oil deal, which was originally contracted back in 1985 by Prince Bandar, which set up a slush fund to finance international terrorism. And so, for example, during his 10th, if I'm not mistaken, state visit to Saudi Arabia back in 2014, he has also undertaken many private visits, which we have no idea how many of them there were. Prince, today King Charles, finalized the massive Al Salam arms deal by which British defense firm BAE Systems was selling 72 Eurofighter Typhoons to Saudi Arabia. And in 2012, Charles became the first royal patron of all three main British intelligence services: the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, Security Service, MI5, and Communications Headquarters, in Cheltenham. So what does Prince, today King Charles, and the Saudi royal family collaboration consist of? Well, you see, one of the organizations which Prince Charles operated is the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, created at Magdalen College, Oxford University back in 1985. And then in May 2012, Queen Elizabeth II, she herself granted, the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies a royal charter in honor of its 25th anniversary. Now, one of the founders of the center is Abdullah Omar Nassif, who is named in the court case brought by the families of the victims of 9/11 for his role in supporting and financing the hijackers. And Prince Charles also founded and also chaired the Rabita Trust and served as Secretary General of the Muslim World League in 1983 period, during the height of the Anglo-American backing for the Afghan Mujahideen in their war against the Soviet Union. And by the way, Muslim World League was founded in the 1960s, when leading figures in the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood took refuge in Saudi Arabia after the Nasser regime crackdown. And so the International Revolutionary Mission of the Muslim Brotherhood was merged with the Wahhabi branch of Islam to form, let's say, the basis for this global jihadist recruitment drive. And the Muslim World League was at the very center of the formation of the global jihad apparatus that is at the heart of global terrorism to this day. And then in the early 1980s, Nassif co-created the Maktab al-Khidaman, which was the backbone organization of the Arab Afghani Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which in 1989 changed its name to Al-Qaeda. And according to 9/11 family's lawsuit, knowingly provided financial support for Al-Qaeda through the Muslim World League, Rabita, and the International Islamic Relief Organization. And Nassif, again, a few years ago, he was the chairman of the board of trustees of Prince Charles's Oxford Center and has been the prince's confidant for over 2 decades. And so the question, again, going back to the original question, what do the British-Saudi terror links consist of? You see, the existence of an Anglo-Saudi top-down command over Al-Qaeda and also over every other jihadist front group is well known within some circles at the highest levels of the American government dating back decades. And one need to look no further than the close-knit relationship between the House of Saud and the Bush family, to understand the Saudis' powerful reach across the globe. The successive Bush, we're talking about father, Bush son, the Obama administrations, they have presided over a brutal cover-up of this Anglo-Saudi treachery, making them complicit before, during, and also after the fact in these terrorist atrocities that have claimed tens of thousands of lives globally, and also collaterally, we're talking about millions more, and provided the pretext for every police state tyranny that has been brought on the United States since September 11, 2001. Because, you see, you have to remember that the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, are all Saudi British creation. They cannot survive without the financial support, the weapons, the intelligence, and even protection, but also drug money, which is being laundered in the Gulf countries. And these are all a part of the whole Anglo-Saudi army, which is now being run as a kind of a supranational force, a force of globalization. And so, for example, in economic globalization, you have the multinational companies, and now you also have the multinational terrorist organizations or groups that can run over borders of sovereign nations. And that's, I think, really is the issue with the so-called Islamist terrorist groups. They're being run as a kind of an international army of the Anglo-Saudis to destroy nation states, to terrorize populations, and to go to the side of the Saudi Wahhabi cult. And so the main danger comes from the abolishing of the principles of national sovereignty, creating religious war conditions all over Eurasia, Africa, and in general, and specifically sub-Saharan Africa in particular, where these Wahhabi groups are actively destabilizing governments. And again, should they succeed, as we're seeing right now, the case in point in Syria, it will literally put us into a direct confrontation with Russia and China, and into this terrifying realm of the global nuclear war. And don't think for a moment that the British and the Americans, or the American strategists in London and Washington are not aware of this. You see, over the past 50 years, Saudi Arabia has been transformed into the state that has helped bring the world to the verge of a thermonuclear war of annihilation. Because the country today is, number one, the hub for control and deployment of Wahhabi-based terror around the world. Number two, the center for siphoning trillions of petrodollars that largely found their way into the accounts in the city of London. Number three, an internal police state under Wahhabi authority. And finally, the largest militarized state and purchaser of defense weapons in the third world. And so given the failure to expose and wipe out the Anglo-Saudi American authorship, funding, protection of this global jihad and narco-terrorist nexus, the so-called global war on terrorism has been turned into one of the biggest criminal hoaxes and scams in modern history. Okay, so this on the one hand. On the other hand, the other day I saw a curious photo of one of Persian Gulf media. Sitting together, you have former Afghan Defense Minister Mullavi Muhammad Yaqub, son of Mullah Omar himself, who was the spiritual leader of the Taliban back in the 1990s, and especially with the American invasion. And the Minister of Interior, Suraj Haddin Haqqani, the son of Jalaluddin Haqqani, one of the Haqqani clan, and a close personal friend of Osama bin Laden. And so, if you look at the photo itself, you have to realize that Afghanistan at the time was becoming one of the key junctions of Eurasia. Now, strictly speaking, it has always been like this. Only the intensity of the world's attention towards Afghanistan was different back in the 19th century. Because, you see, the region's main transit routes passed through Afghanistan dating back to the days of the Silk Road caravans. And the shortest land route from, for example, Istanbul to Delhi, Islamabad, China via Karakorum goes, in fact, through Afghanistan. Also, the land route for Russian products to India and back also goes through this area. And so, without mentioning the military component of the Afghan location or the country's mineral wealth or its drug production regions. And so, one way or another, everyone who will now work with Kabul and wants to resolve their geopolitical issues through the Afghan area of influence will communicate and interact with these people in the photo. The son of Mullah Omar, the supreme leader of the Taliban in the 9/11 era, and the son of the Haqqani brothers, intimates of Osama bin Laden and one of the biggest bandits in the history of the Middle East, Central Asia. Okay, and so needless to say, we're talking about the cross-section of civilizations, where everyone has their own, very colorful biography, and everyone has pretty similar ideas. Okay, what is good and what is bad, what is Afghanistan's place in the world, what is true Islam, etc., etc. And so whoever can reach an agreement with these people will go a long way in the implementation of their geopolitical and economic goals. And then the question is, where do the children of Mullah Omar and the Haqqani clan learn the ups and downs of life? Well, obviously in the madrasas. And so contrary to popular belief, the Taliban, they're not a natural product of Afghanistan. They never existed in Afghanistan prior to 1994. That's what most people don't understand. Afghanistan has never had a political religious group of that name, nor has Afghans ever heard about this group before. Because the Taliban is a movement centered on the Wahhabi doctrine funded by the Saudis and Gulf money, as well as by the joint British-Saudi Al-Yamama slush fund. Because you see, at the end of the Soviet misadventure in Afghanistan in the late 1980s, as Afghanistan plunged into the civil war in the 1990s, the Saudis began funding this new wave of madrasas in Pakistani Pashtun majority area near the Afghan border, as well as in the port city of Karachi in the rural Punjab. And so in Pakistan's northwest frontier province, bordering Afghanistan and the gateway to the famed Khyber Pass, madrasas supplied both the Afghan refugees and Pakistanis as kind of a cannon fodder for the Taliban. And so the Saudis and Gulf petrodollars, they encouraged a kind of a Wahhabi jihad-centered curriculum. And again, if you look at some of the prominent madrasas, you're talking about Darul Ulum Haqqani at Akora Khatak and the Bunari Madrasa in Karachi. And the Darul Ulum Haqqani boasts almost the entire Taliban leadership amongst its graduates, including its top leader Mullah Omar, while the Bunuri Madrasas, whose leader Mufti Shamzai was assassinated, was once talked about as a possible hiding place of Osama bin Laden, and is also reported to be the place where Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar formed the Al-Qaeda-Taliban partnership. And so these madrasas, they formed the basis for the Deobandi terrorist groups, not too distant from what the Wahhabis are, and such as, for example, the Harkud al-Mujahideen, Jayish Muhammad, which sought to do the Pakistan Army's bidding in India and Kashmir. Okay, and so what's more, the House of Saud worked together with Al-Qaeda in setting up these madrasas. For instance, Saudi Arabia's Prince Turki bin Faisal, who had taken over the General Intelligence Directorate, Riyadh's main intelligence services, in 1977 and headed it until 2001, had known Osama bin Laden, in fact, since the 1970s. And bin Laden became one of the linchpins, okay, of America's and British policy, or funding policy towards EC and anti-Soviet warfare in Afghanistan. And he also met with Turkey several times in Islamabad. I repeat, the Taliban is a synthetic product created in a laboratory to bring about instability throughout the area. And the instability is essential for the empire builders, and those who know how the British Empire was built back in the 18th and the 19th centuries would recognize the phenomenon in a flash. And so the Pakistani EC intelligence and the military, they trained the group of Islamic zealots indoctrinated by these Saudi-funded Wahhabism, a kind of an ultra-conservative version of Sunni Islam, and with the Islamic flag in their hands and Pakistani soldiers providing the fighting muscle for the empire, the Taliban, and through them, the House of Saud dreamed of imposing their Wahhabi extremism on the rest of the planet. And tomorrow, I will show you the links between the U.S. deep state and terrorism. I'm Daniel Estulin. Thanks so much for joining us. Please join our channel. It's free on YouTube. Or if you want more in-depth information, you can join us at our subscriber site called estulin.media. Thanks, and until tomorrow, goodbye.